so we can kind of teach you how to get clear on your goals and values and make sure your healthcare preferences are known and honored. Next slide. So caring conversations, if you boil it down, is we just know from many decades of experience that having the opportunity for an individual and a family to reflect before there is a crisis can make the difference between a family that's torn apart by disagreements over, quote, what mom would have wanted, or the peaceful, dignified end that we all want for ourselves and those we love. Nobody wants their death to be the reason their family doesn't get together anymore for holidays or birthdays or Thanksgiving, because these are very difficult things that happen in families. It's life and death, and people don't get over it. So you want to have the conversations ahead of time, so when someone you love and care about is approaching death, it can be as peaceful as possible. Next. So advanced care planning conundrum. We're just a death-defiant culture. Many cultures around the globe are much more inclusive of the fact that all of us are going to die. They're willing to think about it, willing to talk about it. But Americans pretty much are reluctant to think or talk about not only death, but serious illness or goals of care. And especially when things are going pretty well and people feel pretty good. We're in an inflection point, I believe, right now because the virus is spiking. Nobody is immune right now. And this is exactly the time to have these conversations and make plans before somebody is ill. And we really I do these talks just to encourage people not to wait until you're seriously ill or someone you love and care about is seriously ill. And there are a variety of tools to guide you through this process, including this talk. And hopefully by the end of it, you will feel much more confident about undertaking this work for yourself and then working with your loved ones. Next. There's some mistaken beliefs about this. I'll always be able to make my own decisions. I think people who have been very self-ordering through their lives, in charge, able to make all their decisions, really want to believe that they'll be calling the shots to the very end. We know statistically that's just not true. Many of us end up either on medication that prohibits conversation, or on a ventilator, or some other kind of equipment that makes it impossible for us to communicate. So we want to kind of put this one to bed. It's unlikely. And I think the next slide will help make this memorable for you. I use this image. It's a shift change at a teaching hospital. And it's just to say that not only does the data say that 85% of us will die without capacity to make decisions or on life support or something, but I make the understatement here, it can get complicated. These are people of goodwill right now working extra long shifts, exhausted, at great risk to themselves and their families. And to have a family who's never had these conversations that they're having to work with or getting to work with during a difficult illness that is probably going to end in death, you really need to have your ducks in order before you're in a situation, hospitalized, somebody's hospitalized. And now, as you know, they don't even let visitors, family close. So next slide. So how we die is changing. My grandfather was in his mid-70s, and he was just having a cup of coffee one morning and just pitched forward and was gone. Now, I think he would have lived a longer life. He would have been on statin drugs. We would have been managing his blood pressure. He might have had a pacemaker. Most of us now are going to die not from that kind of immediate thing, but complications from chronic illnesses, with slow and uncertain disease paths. And of course, one of the fastest growing causes of death is now dementia, which is a very slow, long course in many cases. Next. So many of you have heard about living wills or healthcare directives, and those are the legal forms. And I mentioned and showed a picture of the workbook that you can get copies of. But right in the center of this workbook are those forms: the durable power of attorney for healthcare decision making, and on the back of it is what we call the healthcare directive, healthcare treatment directive. And together those make an advanced care plan. But we know these legalistic forms are limited in what they can anticipate and how well they can guide the agent, the person who's making decisions for the person who's no longer able to. And as you sit down to talk to family members, one of the sticking points often is, well, how can I know what's going to happen to me? I mean, obviously with COVID, we have that idea, but all the other things that go wrong with us are still happening. It's just that COVID is taking all the attention right now. But it can seem like all the what ifs can kind of get you into an infinite puzzle, and it's hard to talk about what might actually happen. So of course, next slide, the researchers have done a good job in helping us think this through. So these are, this graph shows 4 different basic ways that most of us experience an illness or serious health condition that leads to death. The first one, I talked to you about my grandfather. My dad died exactly the same way. He went to bed at 73, perfectly fine, and didn't wake up. His death certificate says arrhythmia. No previous heart, nothing, but he was just fine, and then he was gone. Horrifying for our family, our very close family, and we'd all just been together 2 days before, but there were no healthcare decisions to be made in my dad's case. The second one is a common one too, for things like a brain tumor or some pancreatic cancer diagnosis, or something that often is a short course illness that ends in death. My colleague Laurel Labou was in this category. He called me one morning and said, Linda, I'm going to be late to work. I kind of passed out at breakfast, and Diane's making me go to the doctor. And I'm really sorry to be late. I'll be in as soon as I get there. Well, the next call I got was from the emergency department at KU, and his wife was saying, Linda, come quick, he's got a brain tumor. And there were decisions. You see the little line at the top, the little horizontal line before the decline. There were decisions to be made along the way. He chose surgery. He had the surgery. Who knows if it extended his life, but he was diagnosed in October and died in early January. So a relatively short course. The bottom 2 are much more common. The number 3 of illness trajectory is familiar to those of you who've known people who have had major heart, lung issues where they do okay, and then they have an episode, they're hospitalized, they get kind of propped back up, but they're not quite as good as they were before. And there's this slow ratcheting down. So there's plenty of time for conversations through those, but decisions are made at every step. And even the decision to hospitalize or not is one that gets considered in number 3. And the good thing about that is that you can have the conversations now, you can talk through what if, but then you can monitor and adjust as the patient himself or herself is still able to communicate. And the 4th one is my sweet mom. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And although the active part where she was being treated for it, and we all knew she had it, was about 9 years, but we think she probably had it 5 years before that. Even the night my dad died, we look back and think about some things that our a very competent mother was so rattled that night, as anybody would be. But there are lots of decisions to be made along the way here. And I'll tell you about how my mom handled this. When she was still able to make decisions. We sat down with her physician, with her, and then you don't need a lawyer for this, but she wanted to be sure her estate was in order. So she took my sister and me with her, and we went to talk to the lawyer. But we had already had these conversations. My sister's a nurse, and she said, I want Sandra to be the durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions, and Linda's a business person, and I want her to handle the estate and be the executor. And I know you girls will work together. But she said, I know the course of this disease, and there's some things I've given some thought to that I want to share with you. And she went right down. She said, I want to live in my own home as long as I can, but I know at some point I won't be able to. And then I don't want to live with either one of you. I love you dearly. And of course, we both were kind of hurt by that at first. But she took care of her parents. And I just told you, my dad died young. My grandfather outlived my dad. And mother and my dad took care of my grandparents for some period of time, and they didn't get to travel like they had planned. And then my dad died. So she didn't want that for Sandra and me. She said, if I can't be at home and I want to be at home, I want you to hire somebody to be there if I can't live alone for as long as that works. And then I know I might have to be in another place sometime with a higher level of care. And she said, in her own inimitable way, she said, and I want it to be nice, but not too nice, because I wouldn't want to spend that much money. And people kind of laugh when I tell that story, but that was our mother. And I'm telling you, along that 10-year course, there were many, many forks in the road where we heard her. She was no longer able to communicate with us, but we had heard directly from her, and we felt like we had our marching orders, and it was, and we had both heard it at the same time, and it was a gift. So if you don't remember anything else about this talk, I want you to remember these 4 boxes and think about your own family and your own self. And it gives you a place to start. There aren't an infinite number of ways that decisions have to be made. There, as you can see, number 2, 3, and 4 give you a framework to start a conversation. Next slide. So when you survey people around the planet, everybody says the same things. Every culture, every religion, everybody says they want to be pain-free with their symptoms managed at the time of their death. They want to be in their own bed if possible, versus being hooked up to tubes and machines, often in pain in the ICU. They want their wishes known and honored versus family and care provider disputes. They want the psychosocial needs of their family met versus isolation. So I use the next slide, and it'll take a couple of clicks for it to fill. I use this slide on the picture on the left with permission of the family and of the person in the bed closest to the front of the picture. This is a member of our board of directors. She had cancer earlier in her life. It returned when she was in her 80s. And she was very clear that she had had a great life. She knew all her kids and grandkids well, and she did not want any extraordinary measures. She wanted to be at home with her symptoms managed. And as you can see, this picture was taken just a few days before she died. Hospice was there regularly. She has a little oxygen, and her pain was managed. One daughter watching TV with her, the other daughter took the picture and sent it to me and said, Mom wants you to use this in your talks. Because on the other side, if she had had an event and her family had a sense that she wanted them to do everything no matter what, if she had difficulty breathing or something, they would have called an ambulance, and she would have ended up in an ICU, which is a wonderful place to be if you're going to be able to get better. But when somebody's dying, an ICU is not where most people want to die. It contradicts all of those things we say we want: pain-free, in our own bed, at home, surrounded by family. And I want you to remember these 2 pictures, because advanced care planning gives you some control over what happens. Next. So this conversation is never more important than it has been right now, because nobody is immune here, and any of us could find ourselves in a difficult situation with COVID-19. It's certainly no respecter of persons, doesn't matter age. It sounds like people of all ages, of all nationalities have been stricken. And we know now that the nursing homes are trying so hard to keep the virus from spreading, that in many cases family can't be close by. So the physicians that I work with who are having to have these end-of-life conversations remotely on Zoom, FaceTime with family members, it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. But families who are facing this for the very first time, when the physician's calling from the nursing home saying your mom is dying, that's not the first time to be thinking about this. So having caring conversations with your family ahead of time, having been over some of this ground earlier, can really help. Next. Some more mistaken beliefs about this. My family already knows my wishes. So this is an audience participation thing. You don't have to say anything, but I want all of you to think for just a second, what's the last conversation you had with somebody really close to you? Just think about that for a second. For most of it, it was very much an activity of daily living. When do we need to go to the grocery store? Are we going to have Thanksgiving or not? Just the basic kinds of things that we talk about. Who's picking up the dry cleaning or taking the dog to the vet? It's just basic stuff. We very seldom have the TV off, the house quiet, sit down with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and really have a face-to-face conversation about hard topics. So your family does not already know your wishes about death and dying unless you have had a conversation about it. And don't expect them to just kind of figure it out based on something you said 15 years ago when the Terry Schiavo case was in the news. Next. Another thing I want to caution you about is you think about who is the person I want to choose to make decisions for me. Family or friends are often unwilling or uncertain agents when you come to them and ask them if they would do this on your behalf. Sometimes you can't assume they'll say yes. And I'll tell you, I got a call from one of our local Kansas City hospitals. This has been several years ago now, and I could hardly hear the woman on the phone. But her first, it's typical that the first question is not the real question, but she said, her first question was, if my mom put 2 people on the top line, who gets to decide? And she said, we're here in the ICU waiting room, and my mom filled this out, and she has 2 people on the top line, who gets to decide? And she said, I'm one of 12 kids, and she said, they're all here in the waiting room, and the reason you can barely hear me is that my oldest brother and my oldest sister are both on the top line, and they're screaming at each other, and they never got along anyway. And she said, so which one of them gets to decide? So I kind of took a deep breath. I felt so sorry for this family, and I'm sure their mother would have wanted anything but that to be going on. And I said, tell me a little bit about what's going on. And she said, well, my mom asked me to be her durable power of attorney, but I'm the middle child. I have 12 siblings. And I just said, Mom, nobody listens to me. I just don't think I can do that. And so she put my oldest brother and my oldest sister on the top line, and they've never liked each other. And I said, well, tell me about your mom. Is she conscious? And she said, oh yeah, she's conscious. And I said, well, is she able to speak? Does she have a tube down her throat or anything? And she said, oh no, she's able to speak. And I said, well, is she competent to make decisions for herself? Oh yeah, she is. And I said, well, then nobody in the waiting room gets to decide. This only kicks in when the person in the bed dying or ill is completely unable to communicate their own wishes. And I said, what I highly recommend is that you corral the medical team that's taking care of her, get them in the room with her with you and whoever else of your family you want in the room, and have them tell your mom exactly what's going on with her, what options she has, what the upsides and downsides of the options, so that she can make a decision. She may want to talk with you all about it, but she is in charge. And then I said, the next thing you need to do is have her name one person and redo that form, so that when the point comes where she can't make decisions for herself, your family will know who she's named and will be supportive of that person. I think that was a cautionary phone call, and I like to use it just to help make the point of, don't assume that the person you're sitting here right now thinking is going to make decisions for you is going to be a willing participant. Next. My doctor will know what's right. Let's go on to the next slide, and I can just tell you that physicians now are hospitalists in the hospital. If you're hospitalized, your family doctor is not the one who's going to come see you. They have a whole specialty now called hospitalists, where these are physicians who see patients one after another down the hallway all day long, and sometimes 12-hour shifts, and they don't know you from anyone else. And so we have a rule that nobody in our family goes to the hospital alone. COVID, of course, is the exception here. But we always think there needs to be another set of eyes and ears to help the patient. And I'll give you an example. My Aunt Ruth is in a care center now, but at the time where she was living in an apartment, and her granddaughter actually takes care of her and watches out for her. And she called my sister and me and said, we're going on a trip, and grandma has to go to the hospital for a test, and she has to be there overnight, and will you guys go with her? And we said, absolutely. So we moved in. Sandra and I took turns. We asked him to bring in a cot, or sometimes they have a lounge chair, but one of us was with her 24/7 for the 2 days she was there. And over that 2-day period, Friday afternoon to Sunday when she was discharged, we saw 6 different hospitalists who came by, met her for the first time, looked at her chart, and made recommendations that whichever one of us was there helped her listen to and talk through and ask questions if she needed them. But the point here is, and some of you on this call may be old enough to remember Dr. Welby on TV. He was a kindly primary care guy who made house calls and came to the hospital when you're sick. And I just hope you will remember the sentence, Dr. Welby isn't coming to visit Aunt Ruth. That's just not how it works anymore. Next slide. So health systems can often be concerned about possible legal exposure too. I told you about the contentious argument in the waiting room a minute ago, but we call it, particularly when someone's had Alzheimer's for 15 years or something, the daughter or son lives near her, has been taking care of her all these years, and then the son hasn't visited in 10 years, and finally gets the phone call that says mom is dying, and if you want to see her, you need to come now. And they come flying in and say, do everything, keep mother alive, you can't let her die, I have things to talk to her about. There are just all kinds of reasons to have these conversations ahead of time and include everybody who might show up to say, this is who I've named, and this is why. I love all of you, but I want you to support this person. This will be one of the hardest things he or she's ever done, and I want you to support them when the time comes. Very important to think about who will be in the room with a point of view about your care. Next. So the legalistic approach is not enough. I told you about these 2 forms that we have back to back in our workbook. Talking with loved ones about what you meant when you said that on the form, or what you have in mind, or giving them some examples, making a recording of it on your iPhone, which is more and more helping families and physicians sort out what mom would have wanted when mom can't speak anymore. But I make the point that, and it's not a one and done conversation. We want you to talk about this Actually, April 16th, the day after your taxes are due, has been designated nationally as National Healthcare Decisions Day. And we really encourage people on April 16th, file your taxes the day before, take a deep breath, pull your documents out, look at who you've named, think about when was the last time you had a conversation with them, what's changed about your own health status. Conversations are essential to these legalistic documents, having full meaning. And, you know, I held this up a couple of times, and I don't think the light's good enough for you to see this, but the name of it is Carrying Conversations. And I make the point here that we call it Carrying Conversations, not carrying documents, for a reason. Next slide. So another mistaken belief, and this often comes from older men: I've written it down, so I don't need to talk. Often family can't find the document, or they do find it, and then they look at it and they say, I don't know what he meant by this. We never talked to him about it. I have no idea what he or could be she meant about it. So just because you've done the paperwork doesn't mean you're done. Next. So this is shocking to most people. Anybody 18 and older is of majority age, and they need to identify a healthcare proxy and have these documents. 18 or older. The woman that I showed you in bed with her dog in her lap, she couldn't get her kids to talk to her or her grandkids. So they went on vacation. They took the whole family on vacation to Cape Cod. And she called us before she left. She got a Caring Conversation workbook for every member of her extended family. And she said, we locked the doors and we just talked about this. And she said, we laughed, we cried, we told stories, we told each other important moments for us, ways our family members had influenced us. She said it was the most wonderful time our family has ever spent. But it's not easy to get a family to do that. Who will make these decisions? You have to talk about it. And when people say, well, I don't know who to pick, I have 3 kids or I have 2 kids or something, I make the point that not all of your family members or friends are created equal when it comes to being good in a crisis. So think this through. Who's for example, the woman with 12 children, I think she did the right thing to try to get her daughter to do it. I wish her daughter had said yes, because but the next step would have been to call the whole family together with mom saying, I've named my middle daughter, not my oldest daughter, my oldest son. I've named my middle daughter because she's taking care of me. She'll be with me at the hospital. She's the one, if I go to the hospital, she's the one who will be calling you and updating you. And I want you to support her when the time comes. So think about who in your family, and it doesn't have to be a family member. I did a talk one day, actually at Hallmark, and there were some retirees there. And we had about 40 people in the room and lots of interaction. And at the end, I noticed this one woman had been very quiet, and I would never embarrass anybody or call on anybody. This is so sensitive for so many people. But she lingered afterwards, and I went over to her and I said, tell me, thank you for coming, and I hope this was helpful. And she looked me right in the eye and she said, I don't have anybody. I never married. I'm an only child. My parents were only children. They're both gone. I don't have anybody. And I just sat down with her and I said, everybody has somebody. I said, I saw you in animated conversation with these wonderful coworkers that you work side by side with 40 years. Are you close to any of them? Oh, yes, I'm very close. We get together all the time. I said, do you have neighbors? Oh, I have wonderful neighbors. They're my next door neighbors, my best friend. Do you have a faith community? Oh, yes, my church is wonderful. You can pick anybody. It doesn't have to be a family member. And often I think you just need to think about who is going to be the right person when the time comes to represent what you want, and who can who has the support of everybody else in the room. So I have a lot of people who say, oh, I have 3 kids, I could never single one out. Well, if one of them lives in Japan and the other one's in Maine, and the other one takes care of you right here in Kansas City, makes a lot of sense to think about the person who's close, but it might not be that person, but there has to be some thought process. Next. So there's data about this. I won't take a lot of time on this, but earlier conversations about patient goals and priorities for living with serious illness are associated with all kinds of good things. Enhanced goal concordant care. That means that the care that you get is aligned with your goals and what you said you wanted when this time came. Improved quality of life, reduced suffering, better patient and family coping in the last days and hours of your life, higher patient satisfaction as in the run up to the very last chapter. And of course, less non-beneficial care and costs. That's an important feature for all of us. Next. We know that multiple studies show patients with serious medical illnesses do not discuss end-of-life preferences or first discuss them only in the last days to a month of life. And then you see some statistics here about people with advanced cancer. And this is difficult because when somebody gets a diagnosis of cancer, everybody wants to be optimistic. Nobody wants to talk about death. That's why it's important to talk about it before there's a bad diagnosis. And look, the median is just a month before death, the first end-of-life discussion. And 55% of initial end-of-life discussions occurred after somebody was so ill that they had been hospitalized. And the last one is kind of a wake-up call for our medical community. 25% of these discussions were conducted by the patient's oncologist. That's a very low number, and I understand why. You want your doctor to always be optimistic and not saying anything that makes you think they've given up on you. But that's, again, why these conversations need to take place before there's a crisis, and then updated if you do get a very difficult diagnosis. Next. So of this workbook, you can maybe see a little better in this picture. It's divided into 4 parts. Reflect, which is a very personal thing. Sit down with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or a beer or whatever is a calming beverage for you, and think about your life and the fact that we are all going to die, and how would you like to see that happen if you had any control over it. And then before you make a final decision about who you want to name, talk to, if you have multiple family members that might think of themselves as the decision maker at that time, talk to all of them and just tell them what you're thinking and tell them how you're thinking about. There's some recommendations in the book of what criteria to think about for the person. And then talk to that person and see if they're willing. And if so, appoint them. That means getting this document notarized and witnessed, and act on it by getting that document done and the workbook filled out if you can, and then sharing it. Act on it by sharing it. Make sure your physician, your primary care doc has a copy of it. North Kansas City Hospital has mine on file because I live near there, and that's likely where I would be taken if I were in a car wreck or something. So reflect, talk, appoint, and act. And the workbook is divided into those 4 sections and walks you through that. Next. So we'll go through this quickly, but the reflect piece, you just think about your own values, beliefs, concerns, and go to the next slide. Think about what's important to you about the care you receive at the end of life. My mom did not want to be taken to the hospital. She wanted to die in her own bed, and she did. Next. What does it mean to you and your loved ones to die well? Often you hear all these metaphors about battling, especially with cancer, fighting cancer, battling cancer. At some point, cancer patients need to have permission of the family that they're all done. They've had enough. What does a good death look like to you? And this is different for everybody. So you need to think about it for yourself and then help other family members think it through. Next. So then the workbook has the stages of the workbook, talk with loved ones about your wishes, then appoint the person you think is most able to act on your behalf based on your preliminary conversations. Next. And then act by documenting your reflections and conversations in the workbook, and then share that with people. And I encourage people just to take the book, the workbook, and write down on the front of your own copy of it who you shared it with, who you gave copies to. And then if you have a change in your health status, or the person that you've named is no longer in the region or able to help, and you want to make a change, then you know who to give an updated copy. I have people say, oh my gosh, what if 2 copies show up in my chart? They're dated, they're notarized, they'll take the most recent one. So I expect people to do many of these over their lifetime. Your healthcare concerns and issues are very different at 30 than they are at 80, and everything in between. Next. So these are copies of the 2 documents that are actually back to back in the book. And at the bottom of the one on the left is the place for it to be witnessed and notarized. Sometimes people make copies of these and they separate the 2 documents, and that doesn't work, because the notary and the signatures, the witnesses, go with both documents. So keeping them back to back is important. Next. So to just kind of review this, the durable power of attorney for healthcare decision-making, which was the document on the left in that picture, and then the healthcare directive or living will was the one on the right side, and together we call those documents an advance directive. And they're filled out with color and commentary in the pages of your workbook. So let's go to the next slide. The difference here, in now and maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we were so paper-based in the past. Now we're so electronic-based. The Center for Practical Bioethics has a relationship with an online service called My Directives. It's free, and it's a way to store if you want to make a video of your wishes, or you want your documents scanned. You can put them in the cloud in My Directives with all of your information right there. And it can be accessed from any place on the planet that there's internet access. Your family has to know it's there, and they have to know how to get to it, which is made very simple if you go on My Directives. Now, there's a version of our workbook, a PDF, fillable PDF on My Directives. There's also in My Directives another set of questions if you choose that path, up to you, but you have options here. And I make this point, there's nothing like a video of mom to convince a family member who's reluctant to make a decision. It's so hard when a physician comes into the room and says to the gathered family, we've exhausted the curative measures that we have available, and now we are keeping your mother comfortable. And when the son from California sweeps in and says, oh, do everything for mom. You have to keep doing things, keep treating her, try that last 17th round of chemotherapy or whatever. And your sibling, the one who's been named, holds up a video of mom saying, when I can't get better, I don't want to go through this anymore. I'm ready, or whatever. You can say whatever you want. You can say you want chemotherapy till they won't give it to you anymore. But at least you have a video, and that can be uploaded with your My Directives as well. Next. So just some tips for having this. Use comfortable language, take your time. And almost everybody who comes to these classes says, I came because I can't get my mom or dad to do this. And I know they need to do it. And I know I'm going to be left holding the bag. And I need help in figuring out how to get them to do this. And I say, do your own work first, and then share it with them and say, if something happened to me, if I were injured in an accident, a car wreck, something, which happens every day, I want you to know I've named so-and-so, and here's what I've told them. And now I need you to give me that same gift of thinking through it for yourself, naming somebody, and sharing it with all of us so we will know when the time comes. So you can encourage others by doing your own work first. Next. So just as you have these conversations, you may not be able to do it all in one sitting, but check for understanding. Talk about death in a natural way. I love the Forrest Gump's about his mom. His mama says dying is a part of life. It really is. And you can discuss practical issues. I've had people call and say, well, how come there's nothing in your workbook about what funeral home or whether I want to be cremated or not? There are many, many good tools for that. This one is about healthcare decision making, and you can find other resources. But mostly what I'm advocating here is that you share those deeper feelings, the psychosocial, spiritual, and religious concerns that you might have a deeper conversation than maybe you've had in a long time. Next. So as you kind of think about this, you can kind of, I call it the drive home exercise. When I do these in person, most people have driven to the workplace or the library or wherever I'm doing them. And I say, let's just say somebody's texting in an intersection on your way home and you get T-boned and you're unconscious at the scene. And I say, how do the emergency responders know who to call? You're unconscious. We're not killing you here. We're just saying you're unconscious. You can't make decisions for yourself. Make sure there's information where first responders know. You can put it in your emergency and your contacts in your phone. But think about that. And then think about who are the first responders going to call, and then who are the first 5 people that person is going to call. And it's not necessarily the people you would call, it's the person that person would call. And they're all going to be hovered in the emergency room, waiting for news of your condition with a point of view about your care. And so that gives you a starting place to think about who should be involved in this conversation for you and who should know what your wishes would be if you couldn't get well. And this is not a one and done conversation. As I said, April 16th needs to be updated every year. And maybe it's just reading it. Maybe it's just calling the person that you named to speak for you and say, I just want to thank you for agreeing to do this. It gives me a lot of peace of mind that you've said yes, and that I know you know my heart and what I would want you to do when I can't do it for myself. So we're very close to done here. Next slide. Complete your own workbook first, have a caring conversation with your loved ones, and then tell others about your workbook. And I tell people, I mentioned a minute ago, write down on the front of your copy of your workbook who you gave it to. Some people, your hospital, your doctor, your faith community leader, relatives, make a list of who you would want called. Next. And this is not, it is a one step at a time process. You certainly do it when you're healthy. Look at it again when you become seriously ill. And then when you or a loved one you're responsible for begins to decline, you need to have the conversation again with more specificity about end of life. And each of these life events are kind of signposts along the way and along the path of advanced care planning. So whether you do it on April 16th every year or not, these are some big times that you need to think about it. So we have tools to help you online. Next slide. The workbook itself, the conversation aid. We have little bracelets that look like hospital bracelets that people in my classes put on to remind them to do this, because everybody leaves my classes with good intentions, and then I know that sometimes this workbook goes on the pile of good intentions because it's difficult to think about. But we also have a little conversation starter flip book that you can get from our website too, if that would help you. So let's skip to the next slide and the next one. Keep going. Yeah. I've already covered this. And then the last one just has all of my contact information. Next slide. This is the main number at the center and my email address at the center. I retired just a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to continue to do this work. They've kept all of my information there. I'm also happy to give you my cell phone number if we don't have time for your question tonight and you want to call me. So if you have something to write on, it's 816-674-9395. 816-674-9395. So let's just go back to the view and see if, I don't know if we have any questions, but I'm happy to answer any that we have.
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much. I was monitoring the chat, and we did have one question that I think we can certainly address, and it's about if there are digital workbooks or how we will be able to disseminate the workbooks. And I think that might be more of a Jenny question, potentially, but that was the one question we had in the chat so far.
Yes, so there is a digital workbook, and we can provide the link for that through the Center for Practical Bioethics. But at the library, we have hard copies of the workbook. And if you would like to receive one of those, after our program tonight, I'm going to send an email out to everyone who RSVP'd, and you can just respond to that and send me your mailing address, and we'll make sure that you get that sent out. Probably end of this week, early next week.
And then practicalbioethics.org, practicalbioethics.org is our website. And just click on the Caring Conversations button, and there is an electronic fillable PDF version that you can download. You can also download the workbook itself. It won't be, all put together. And that's where, if you're not downloading it to print back and front, you'll separate those two documents if you download it, but just staple them together, keep them together. So there are multiple ways to get the materials. The workbook from Jenny, and I know you have lots of them. So if people wanted one for themselves and somebody in their family, they could probably do that.
Yeah, definitely. However many you would like, let me know that as well.
And you can call the center and order them. They're $3 each, and we'll mail them to you too.
Yes. I had a question that just occurred to me throughout this presentation. After you fill out the form and you have it notarized, you've got your original copy. Is a photocopy going to be enough for your hospital chart, or how does that work?
Yeah, I tell you, caregivers are so grateful to have some guidance and know who to talk to. Yes, I tell people make as many copies and distribute as many copies. I think about the woman I talked about with 12 siblings, her mom ought to send a copy to all of them. And so it's not like just one person has them. And yeah, photocopies are fine.
Okay.
I will tell you that the hospital people tell me all the time that they have a fully executed power of attorney in front of them, and they call the person, and the person had no idea they'd been named, had never had a conversation with the person. And what I say to that is simply not fair to put somebody in that position and not even tell them that you've done that. So that's why the conversation piece is so much important. It's such a big part of this, not just doing the documents. So
yes, don't do that to someone. Wouldn't that be a tough phone call to receive? Like, oh.
It happens all the time.
Wow.
It's terrible.
Yes. Well, before we started this, I was talking with Linda before we started the whole webinar about how near and dear this topic is to my heart. And I just wanted to share really quickly, because I think sometimes we think this won't happen to us, but over the course of 2 years, my father passed away. A year later, his father passed away. And then the following year, my best friend passed away, and she was only 42. And none of them had these documents done. And it was such a hard thing for our family making decisions. And so what I would like to tell people who haven't done this is that you're giving a gift to your family. As hard as it is to think about dying and death, and our culture doesn't really like to talk about those things, you're really giving a precious gift to your family by having these conversations and making some of these decisions when you're well and when it's easy for you to communicate what you want. So Linda, I thank you so much for
my pleasure.
For this presentation and for all the presentations you've done. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up for the evening? Okay, it doesn't look like it, but you've got Linda's contact information, and I'll make sure and send that out in the email as well.
Okay.
Okay, well, thanks everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Linda.
Be safe.
Good evening.